Okay. Excellent. Good to see you all.
Really good to see you all. I've just realized that I need to, how do I turn the noises off when people join?
I think you have to do that when you start, but I can watch it and try to be helpful.
Okay.
So I'll admit people as well.
Well, it's absolutely lovely to see so many people here today. Welcome. Welcome to our talk. I'm here with Adam and Mia, and we are just going to run a solution-focused conversation live and record and show you what happens in the brain when we do that. And we've had a couple of practice runs and it looks fun. We're going to mix the questions up a bit and see what happens. And Adam will be explaining what's going on as this happens. So those of you who haven't seen our presentations so far, I'm interested in what happens in the brain during solution-focused conversation. So I'm really interested in knowing what part of the brain activates when we ask certain things, and how we can tell when the person is kind of processing the question, or, you know, just kind of thinking it through, whether it's a kind of more logic-based question, whether it's a more emotion-based question, whether it's a relational-based question. We're just really interested to see what happens. And what you're going to see is my brain producing tons of brain waves. The brain waves are different colors. So we have alpha, beta, theta, and gamma today. And each of these has a slightly different function. So alpha is more around visualization. And when you see me perhaps imagining a response or thinking about the answer or the person mentioned, then you might see a bit of alpha. Beta is me probably working quite hard, trying to think of an answer, trying to think of, you know, perhaps a number on a scale or something like that. I think Mia's got some questions to ask me as well, which might show the difference between kind of like logic questions and emotion type questions. Theta is the brainwave that I'm really interested in, which is around kind of decision making and finding solutions. So I'm really interested to know when I go into that kind of solution finding state. And then gamma does a lot of things. It's part of the functionality of the brain, but it also produces in me, for sure, quite a lot of emotion. So Adam and me have been having a lot of fun asking me strange questions to see what happens with the different kind of brainwaves. So what we'll do is we'll do a little bit of some questions. We'll stop. Adam will help try and make sense of what we're seeing. We'll move on to a few more questions, and then Adam will help make sense of what we're seeing. I will dip in and out. I'm going to try my hardest not to look at the computer screen, because I like to see what my brain is doing while it's working, and that's no good at all. So I'm going to try and look out the window in front of me and pretend there's no, you know, kit on my head. Some of you might be able to tell I've already got the EEG kit on. So I'm going to pretend I haven't got that on, that we're just having a conversation, and we'll see. Is there anything, Mia and Adam, you want to kind of say moving forward?
Just to say that make use of the chat function. Adam, Rachel and myself, but primarily Adam, will do his best to collect your questions or answer your questions. But that's a good place to write things down if you have any comments or questions. During the talk, there'll be time for questions afterwards. We should maybe introduce the project just briefly. Don't know how many people are aware of why are we doing this, Rachel and Adam, really?
Sure. Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about that. So Mia should get the credit for introducing the three of us together and getting this project together. Rachel and I are both kind of interested in neuroscience, and we're looking at different aspects of neuroscience, but really hadn't connected to each other. And then Mia kind of drew the two of us. There we go. Mia drew the two of us together. So we have been doing a project where we're asking clients to wear the headset that you see on Rachel's head now, while they are receiving solution-focused therapy. And then the project that we're working on is, in essence, what happens in someone's brain as they are receiving solution-focused therapy. And we're looking a bit at, and kind of why we decided to show you what we're going to show you today is we're looking at when we ask different kinds of questions, does that impact what's happening for clients? And so what's really, I think, great about this project is that each one of us, we're in different locations. I'm in the United States, Rachel's in England, and Mia is in Denmark. And so we're kind of drawing on lots of different expertise. We're also working with a couple of professors from the University of Gloucestershire in England, and they're the ones who are kind of analyzing and reviewing that EEG data. And so really what we're trying to understand is what happens when people are engaged in solution-focused conversations. Did you want me to say anything more than that?
You did very well.
Okay, wonderful. I think then, just so you know, so Rachel is going to share her screen. And I'll just give you a brief overview of what it is that you're seeing so you can kind of know what you're looking at. And right now, what you're seeing is Rachel's brain. And what Rachel just pulled up then is this legend down in the corner. And the legend corresponds to those 4 different brain waves that Rachel went over. So that blue color is theta waves. So again, and you'll notice that I say it in an American way and Rachel says theta. So theta waves, again, just are that problem solving, decision making, a lot of logic and reason, those kinds of things. The next one down is the purple, and that's the alpha waves. Again, that's going to help us to see visualization, kind of that imagination, and together alpha and theta, they kind of come together in that creativity, that imagination, those kinds of things. And then the next one down is pink, that's the beta. And this is that hard work, catching things, working really hard to like pull things apart and problem solve, those kinds of things. And then the final is this kind of reddish orange color at the bottom, and that's the gamma waves. Really what I think is connecting there is you'll see that come up when we talk about like typically other people, relationships, things like empathy and emotion. You'll see some more of those gamma rays come up. The other thing that I would say that might be important for you to pay attention to is you see that Rachel's brain is quite active on the left side. That's fairly typical. And then every once in a while, you'll see kind of that right side front part. And that's a place, again, where logic and reason, but that's also a point of kind of discovery where you say like, okay, aha, I've come up with the idea, or I know the answer to this question. And so you can see some kind of resolution or decision-making that comes about in that process. The final thing that I would say about this brain part is if any of you know much about brains, you're going to recognize that we're talking at a very global high level plane. We're just trying to give people at this point the general overview of what we're seeing. In addition to this view, we can see, which we won't really look at today, but we'll see that on the headset, there are 14 different sensors that touch Rachel's head. And you can see a different view where you can see the activity on each one of those 14 sensors separately. So that gives you a much more detailed description about what's happening. But that might be too much for today. So we're going to stick to this kind of high level conversation for today. Rachel, Mia, anything that I should have mentioned that I didn't?
Nope, that was perfect.
Okay. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to give Mia just about 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes, just a few minutes, to start asking Rachel some questions. And she's going to ask predominantly solution-focused questions. And just pay attention to what you see, what stands out. At the end of this few minutes, then I'll chime in and I'll talk about a few of the things that I noticed as they were having their conversation.
Okay.
Thank you. So Rachel, I'm just going to invite you to have a think about something, a decision or a project, something that you're working on at the moment in your life. You may choose where, in what arena, that's present in your life right now, where you have to either make a decision or have thoughts about moving on to the next step in that process that you're in. And just give me a sign when you have a thing you want to. Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to start out with a scale. So on a scale from 10 to 1, 10 being you feel confident that you have made the decision and you are ready to make the next step in this process, and 1 being the complete opposite. Where would you rate yourself this very moment as you're sitting here?
About a 6.
About a 6.
Hmm.
And what's making it a 6 already? What's already happening that's making it a 6 for you?
I think I have a good amount of information that it's something that I feel positive about, and that I feel I have what I need in order to take the next step.
What else is making it a 6?
There's another person involved, and that person is probably at the same place as me. And that helps me because that confirms what I'm thinking. It's always, that's the kind of person I am. I like to have other people kind of involved, and I feel more confident when another person feels the same way or similarly.
And what has already happened so far that's telling you that 6 is the right place to be at this very moment for you in this process?
A lot of thinking, a lot of, looking at things logically as well as emotionally. And so there's quite a lot there where done a lot of what I'd call information gathering. There's still a lot more to go, but I know more now this week than I did last week.
And what about this information gathering has made a difference in a way that you can put yourself on a 6 at this very day, this very moment?
I suppose the information that I've gathered so far makes me feel more positive, that it's something that is possible and achievable. And it relates to different parts of my life. And certainly one part is comfortably happy with the decision if we were to go ahead with it.
And what's happening already at a 6 that's giving you this sense of it being possible and achievable?
I suppose it relates to kind of practicalities, that they are surmountable, that I can do what is needed to be done, and that it's not a big deal, not a really big deal.
What is it instead?
Sorry.
What is it instead of being not a big deal? What is it instead?
It's a kind of medium deal. Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
It means that this is something that could happen. That in terms of decisions that need to be made in one aspect of this decision, is pretty easy, kind of a phone call, and that's about it, really. Yeah.
And what have you been pleased to notice about the way that you've collected all this information and made use of this information already that is helpful for you in the process and the steps ahead of you, lying ahead of you this very moment?
What have I been pleased to notice? How useful Google is.
Yeah.
For finding answers.
Yeah.
You know, that actually it's so easy to find the answers. And that is a good thing. You know, that helps so much that it's not perhaps as hard as it might have been a long time ago. You know, now that information is so easily available, you know, a few clicks and I can actually find out quite a lot in order to help me make this decision.
Okay, can I pause? Okay, well, ask one more. Yeah, ask one more.
What would be the first little sign you would notice? Maybe already today, maybe in the next coming few days, that things are moving further up from a 6. Little signs telling you that you are moving onwards, you are moving towards your 10.
I suppose it would be positive self-belief, a confidence, a little excitement. For me, it would be a combination of both, like kind of like physical feelings of excitement, as well as kind of, yeah, more psychological kind of confidence and happiness, I think.
Cool. Thank you. Adam?
Thank you. That was great. So I'm just going to point out a couple of things. So just for those of you who weren't here at the beginning, I don't know if you can see Rachel's picture well enough, but she's purposely trying not to look at the screen. So she doesn't see what's happening in her brain while she's answering these questions, because I could influence her quite a bit just by saying, hey, do you notice this? Or right. So do you see how all of a sudden her brain turned quite red and pink because now she knows that we're talking about her and she's right. So I can have a big influence on what happens in her brain, which I think is one of those one of the clues to us. Oftentimes we talk about solution-focused brief therapy as a co-construction, right? And we compare that to, oftentimes people will say the client is the expert. And I would say there are actually 2 experts sitting in the room. That if I'm really purposeful about my questions, I could have a direct impact on how people think, how people feel. I can, again, I'll do, before what I saw, I'm going to do one more kind of experiment for you, just so you can see. If I ask Rachel some questions like, Rachel, I want you to follow me in a sequence here. I'm going to give you some math facts that I want you to add in your head for me.
Okay.
I want the rest of you just to pay attention to what happens in her brain, different than when we started talking about, right? So are you ready, Rachel?
I am.
All right, I want you to start with the number 20, and I want you to divide that number by 5. And then I want you to add to that 3, and then multiply that number by 3. And subtract from that number 10. Can you tell me what number you ended up with?
I missed the last instruction. Sorry, somebody's not muted.
I believe I said subtract 10 from that number.
Okay, I have 11.
Okay, so I have no idea if you were right or wrong because I was not paying attention. But did you all see that what happened is it really located on the left side and it was really blue, right? So those theta waves, and it was also, that's that problem solving logic reason. And now again, just for fun, I'm gonna switch for just a second and I'm gonna say, okay, so now, Rachel, I want you to think about someone who's very important to you, someone that you love with your whole heart. I want you to imagine that person walking into the room where you are. And I want you to imagine that person smiling at you and then moving closer toward you, close enough that they could reach out and hug you. And I want you to imagine yourself in that embrace. And I want you to think what it feels like when you breathe and they breathe in sync with you. And then, now this will be really fun. Now I want you to remember that all of these people are watching you.
Here it goes.
You see what happens, something totally different happens. Because of the question, because of the things that I say to Rachel. And so I think that's one of the really important takeaways of this process. So now I want to go back to that conversation now that I've completely distracted you. But at the beginning of that conversation, and you'll have to go back and watch the recording of this, but back at the beginning of the conversation, Mia asked Rachel to think about a decision that she had to make. And it was blue, lots of that blue logic reason. And it was centered right here in the front of her brain, which is also the frontal lobe, which is again, that logic reason location. And then she asked questions about the scale. Where are you on the scale? And it turned that purple color, right? Which is that visualization. So now Rachel is thinking about what number am I? What does that look like? How does that represent? And that purple starts to show up. And I'm going to say, you can kind of watch it happen again as I described, because she's going to go back through what she went through before. And it tends to move from the back of your brain to the front of your brain, right? So as you're thinking of ideas, they tend to generate in the back. And then as you're weighing those decisions and putting it all together, it moves to the front. And then what happens when you kind of settle in on I'm a 6, then it moves over to that right side of the brain. And again, that's where it's like, now I understand, I've come to a decision, I can tell you what the answer is, right? So you watched a little bit of that happen. And then a couple of things when she said, what tells you that 6 is the right place for you to be, right? She, at that point, Rachel mentioned, well, it feels good. It's an emotional place that I am. And that then is where you saw almost her whole brain light up, and it turned that reddish color, right? Those gamma rays, right? That emotional place, much like you just saw kind of elicit again, right? That red place. And And so you see her as she thinks about this 6, but it's a 6 that it's an emotional 6. Then you start to see those beta and gamma waves come back. When you saw Mia ask Rachel the question of what's happening already that lets you know that this is kind of, that you're pleased with being at a 6. And her brain did exactly what it's doing now, all back to the left side, that dark blue and pink color, right? Because now again, she's thinking back, what's the logical reason that I'm at a 6? And what difference does it make that I'm at a 6? And then Mia switched the question and said, what does it mean to you, right? And you saw all those, the gamma rays, I just shot you all with gamma rays. the gamma waves come back. Right, and you see the meaning making is more of that empathy emotion place, and then it was really, really great right at the very end. I'm glad that Mia made sure that she asked one more question, because she said she asked a really meaningful question, and Rachel's answer was, it's a positive thing. And then she moved from positive to confident, and from confident to excitement. And as she did that, you saw again, kind of her full brain kind of become activated, and a lot more of that gamma reddish color show up. So you can kind of see what happens as she's thinking logically about the numbers or where she is on the scale. There's more thought, more visualization. And then when she's talking about meaning making, it turns into an emotional experience for her. And you can kind of see that now her whole brain is, she just loves this insight that I'm providing. About
I am loving it, Adam. You can see me listening to what you're saying and processing it, making sense of it.
And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting. And as Mia goes into her next set of questions, one of the things that I would orient your attention to is watch the difference in activity between when Rachel is listening, processing the questions, right? She listens really closely, and her brain really will like almost be quiet. And then when it's her turn to answer the question, then it starts to come back to life again, right? And you'll see it kind of go back into action. So you can kind of watch those quiet moments versus kind of those active moments. And you'll see a little bit of that happen as well. Rachel, Mia, did I miss anything? Anything you want to add to that?
No, that's great. Thanks, Adam. I'll stop looking at my brain.
Yeah, do that.
All right, I'm gonna turn it back over to Mia then. And Mia, and just so you know now, we talked about now Mia's gonna shift and she's gonna ask still solution-focused questions, but different types of solution-focused questions, just so you can see differences in what might happen.
Cool, thank you. So Rachel,
yeah,
just before we had the first break, you mentioned that someone else was involved in this process that you're talking about.
mm-hmm.
Who's involved? Is it someone close or work related?
It's my husband. Yeah, Gavin.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned that you would notice the signs that would show within the next few steps ahead of you would be this sense of confidence and excitement. You would have physical reactions, you would notice little things there, but also emotional or psychological reactions like happiness. What would you notice? What little things would you notice that would tell you they're specifically related to this moving on in your process here? What would you notice in you?
I think that would be like an awareness of possibilities.
How would you notice it? What's normally telling you that feeling is there? What signs are you showing yourself?
I suppose it would be a lightness and enthusiasm. I can see that kind of stretching out to other things that I would be doing, even if it was unrelated. You know, that kind of lightness of step and that positivity again.
And who might be the very first person or thing to notice this sense of lightness in you, positiveness, confidence?
That would be Gavin, yeah.
That would
My
be
husband.
Gavin. What might he notice being slightly different in the way that you move about in your day, your world, your way of talking, with this lightness in you?
I think perhaps a little more fun, you know, the way that I talk and the way that I am around him. Maybe a little more fun, a little I keep coming back to the word lighter. That's how it feels. It would be lighter, you know, between us. And yeah, it would be that fun, but I think it would also increase the connection between us.
And how would you notice the increase of connection and more fun?
I think it would be a project that the two of us could work on together. And that is something that we both like doing. We both enjoy a little project. And I think it would bring us together, give us something new to talk about, something that brings us both hope.
And what difference would that sense of hope in your togetherness here, what difference would that make to the process that's lying ahead of you?
I suppose we'd be approaching all the elements in a kind of can-do frame of mind, you know, rather than oh yes, but what if, we would actually be much more in a, well, yeah, what if, you know, and, you know, where do we need to find that out? And I think we would be going into each of the challenges in a more positive way.
And what difference would that make? That the two of you would enter the challenges in a different way together?
I think it would probably mean that we would be more likely to go ahead.
Would that be a good thing?
I think so.
What would you notice about Gavin that told you that he was seeing this version of you?
He'd be delighted. He's a very physical person. He'd be hopping and skipping around the lounge.
And that would tell you that he's noticing this lightness, this confidence and excitement and happiness in you was starting to show.
Yeah. And I know that he'd be looking at me perhaps more closely and smiling and knowing very much that this was something that the two of us felt kind of the same about.
And what might he notice you that tells him that you see this version of him suddenly?
I suppose he'd see it in my eyes. I'd be smiling more and perhaps a softness, you know, that you get when you see someone you love who's so happy and excited.
And what would you notice in him when this happens?
I think he'd be the same, you know, it would be in the eyes for him and the smile. I think it would increase the connection between us and kind of strengthen us as a couple.
And has this happened before?
Not in this way. Similar, not quite in this way.
So what's different?
This is unexpected.
Okay, I want to pause. Thank you. That was wonderful. All right, so I'm going to just point out a couple of things maybe you can take note of. And then after this, we might just open it up for some questions and answers and things like that, conversation mostly. But I think there are a couple of things that are really worth noting in what just happened. So a lot of those questions that Mia was asking, those questions were much more hypothetical questions, right? Instead of what number are you, logic, reason, what would happen next, what would you notice after that, those kinds of things. These are all questions around like, what would it look like and how would you notice? She asked noticing questions multiple times. She asked, what would you notice inside of you? What would you notice about Gavin? What would Gavin notice about you? What would you notice about the connection, right? And those noticing questions, they require a lot more visualization. Now Rachel has to imagine those things happening, and she has to first, that's kind of a first step. I have to imagine those, and then I have to describe what it is that I imagine. So you probably noticed a lot more purple that time around than a lot of that red. That we lost a lot of that red at times, but it came back at really pivotal moments. And the blue kind of tapered just a bit, but the purple came out. And again, that's kind of that visualization of like, I'm trying to imagine this thing happening. And the other thing that happened a couple of times, I hope you caught, that her whole brain lit up. It was like fireworks going off in her whole brain. And the first time that happened is when she mentioned that this would mean that there are possibilities. When she thought about that, the idea of possibilities, her whole brain kind of lit up, right? It was a logical possibility. It was an emotional possibility. It was a visualizing of possibilities. And then the second time that happened is when they mentioned this idea of connection, right? And so you think about what those two things mean. The other thing that's, I think, really fascinating, and you can see it just a little bit now, we'll see if we can make it happen again, but she's using the back side of her brain right here. This is the occipital lobe. And the only color that we see down there for Rachel is this purple visualization color, right? Where she's using that imagination. And that makes sense a bit because that is your visual part of your brain. That's the part that controls your eyes. So it's that mental imagination, that visualization that's happening back there. But in the first set of questions, very, very rarely did we see anything. And several times during this second set of questions, we saw that happen. And you can see just now a bit there, right? And the other thing that happens is you see her brain kind of reacts in two parts. That left side is much more dominated by the blue and the pink. And there's those fireworks again, because now I'm talking about how her brain does all of these things, right? And the right side oftentimes is almost divided and it's all that purple. And so you'll see on one side that logic and reason, that blue, and then simultaneously you'll see right here, did you see that like the purple is on the right side and the blue is on the left side? And that helps kind of also make sense because those are the two halves of our brain that tend to be working together. It's that more creative side versus the more logic side, right? And so you can see as she answered those creative questions, there was a lot more activity on the right side and it was purple. It was kind of that imagination. It was that visualization that happened. And then when she noticed right after that part where she said, we would be able to be more creative, right? We would have a project and we could work on it. This is a different kind of project than we've ever had before, right? And that's where then the beta and the gamma then went big again, right? And you can see here we are happening again, right?
I'm so suggestible, it's ridiculous.
And then if you really want to see her brain turn the same color as her face, you just have to start talking about her and it all turns red.
I'm not going to do it.
I think
you're doing it right now.
I think, Adam, what we're seeing here as well is the effect of your summarizing, summarizing what she's been saying. Then she gets a repetition of the activity in the brain that she had during the conversation, which I think is a valuable notice to have as well, that the effect summarizing has on the client in front of us.
Yeah, and I think too, and it really highlights the value of picking out the client's specific words, right? Again, just thinking about like the words, really valuable words that she inserted. If I spent an entire hour talking about like possibilities, another time that her brain really kind of got active with that purple color is this would be a connection that's fun. That he would be light and she would be light and he would be jumping and dancing around the room and we would have this project that we could work on together, right? There's if I spent a lot of time talking about fun and connection and possibility and how this project fit into all of that, you see her whole brain now is active in thinking about these things. And in some sense, if we think about that idea of language creates reality and language creates change, the words that we focus on, the words that we ask them to elaborate on, that's going to create reality. That's going to create change for them. So I think, again, this highlights that really important concept of this is a co-construction. It's all her language and it's all her meaning making, but I can influence that by picking up specific things in the direction that is in the direction of the desired outcome. So I think that's really apparent in what we're seeing here. All right. We have only just about 15 minutes left. I think we should probably maybe say, what are your thoughts? What questions do you have? What do we need to make sure to get to that we haven't gotten to already? All right, so while you're all thinking about it, Gil did put a question in the chat, so I'm just going to read it and then I'll make Rachel answer because she's probably the most,
okay.
She's so in tune right now. So it says, so can we conclude that the SF approach engages more of the brain than a problem or deficit focused approach?
Well, I suppose today we've looked at what happens when Adam asks me mathematical questions, right? I mean, if you want to, you could ask me a couple of questions that might be more problem focused, Gil. If you want to, we could have a little look, see what happens.
Yeah, good
I
idea.
just put it back onto the screen.
That's a good idea. Gil,
So,
do you want to
Gil, if you're able to
ask
unmute.
some questions, or do you want me to just problem focus her away?
You can take it away, Adam.
Gil, don't chicken out now.
I'm sitting here comfortable and relaxed, and you're in work mode. You're in the groove, man. You go with it.
All right, Gil, I'll help you out.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, Rachel, so I'm going to ask you some problem questions. I want you to think about something that like one of the most difficult decisions you've ever had to make. And just tell me when you got it. Okay. Can you tell me about what made that decision so difficult?
Yeah, that related to a complete change of focus. A bit of background, I used to work at university. I'm now self-employed. That was a difficult decision to make.
And when you had to make this difficult decision, what feelings accompanied that difficult decision?
There was a lot of worry. Could I do it? There was financial concerns. Would I make enough money? There were all sorts of things in terms of what would it mean? I'd be working at home. I wouldn't be seeing people, so I might get quite isolated. So there were quite a few kind of concerns that I had about doing that.
Why was being isolated a concern for you?
I enjoy the company of others. And in my job, I had been in a shared office, working with students, enjoying teaching them about things. And I was going to lose that as well, perhaps, that I wouldn't be in that position, kind of helping students, guiding them, in their careers, that I would just lose all that human contact.
And And who else knew that this was a difficult time for you?
A few people knew, friends and family knew that this was difficult. My office mates, if you like, knew that it was difficult because I'd be kind of leaving them. We had a good working relationship as well.
Okay. And what impact, if any, did that difficult kind of weighing down on you and kind of the back and forth and the uncertainty, how much did that impact kind of your everyday functioning?
I became quite anxious. I was anxious on my commute, thinking about it. Was I making the right decision? I was anxious in team meetings that people didn't necessarily know. Not everybody knew that I was thinking about this. And keeping a secret was difficult as well. You know, that was quite hard for me to not be telling people what I was doing.
All right, so I'm going to pause there because we don't need to draw this out, but a couple of things that I want to highlight. The brain used just as much space in these questions as other questions, right? But a couple of marked differences. One, there was a lot more blue and a lot less red, right? Which is those even though she was describing a lot of things, feeling, she even said I was anxious. That was probably, when she said anxious, that was probably the most red that it got. But I think one of the other things that's really important is that there was still a lot of purple, right? Which is that visualization. The questions still require her to go back and to visualize what that was like and how, especially because it was something in the past, right? So we're still asking our clients to do a lot of the same kinds of things, but you see a lot more blue, a lot less red. And one of the things that you didn't see is kind of on the right. Every once in a while, there would be kind of that full brain activity, but oftentimes the middle of the right side wasn't engaged. And that is where that like emotional connection part of the brain happens to be. So there's almost like a distance or a separation from the emotional experience of the events. Rachel, you can probably add whatever you want to that experience.
It was interesting to go back there. And actually, can I just say how incredibly hard it was to see the negatives, because I've been so pleased with my decision. Perhaps it wasn't a great one to pick, but it was interesting to go back there and to be back in that office and those meetings and knowing that I needed to make a decision, but I had to be careful how I made that decision. I couldn't just tell everyone that I was thinking this, right? Because, you know, they were my employers. And so it felt emotional in a different way. Like before with Mia, I was feeling positive, hopeful, excited. I still had an emotional response, but instead I feel kind of a little more anxious and a little more tight. Like my body language feels kind of closed up. I'm trying to be as neutral as I can while I'm sitting here answering the questions, but every part of me just wants to close up.
I think the images just here when you gave your description, Rachel, was telling it all, because you can talk about it not being positive to go back. As soon as you talked about the effect having it made on you making that decision being positive, as soon as you said it was a good decision for me to make, your whole brain lit up red again. But it was not lighting up in red when you were talking about it not being a positive thing for you. I'm not making conclusions, but I'm just saying.
It just didn't.
So you can talk about emotions, but there's definitely more red activity when you're talking about positive emotions than when you're talking about it having not been a good experience.
I felt the need to almost compress the experience. I didn't really want to talk about it that much. You know, I felt that I was closing in on this experience. and it felt emotional but tightly held, whereas the positive experience was emotional and open, and I just felt more joyful, obviously, with it because it was a positive thing, but I felt like I was closing things. I was almost going into a little box with it. It was an interesting experiment, that.
Wonderful, thank you. Other questions or comments or thoughts that we need to make sure to get to? You can unmute yourselves if you want to. You don't have to put your questions in the chat. We've stumped them all.
Hi, Rachel. Can you hear me?
Yes, Martin. Yeah, go ahead.
What are your best hopes for the outcome of this research?
Oh, we think about this a lot, actually, all three of us. We do think about that a lot, about our best hopes for this. I suppose from a rather boring academic perspective, it's to create data, evidence, possibilities that we can actually measure what's going on in the brain, and that we can detect what happens during certain types of questions. As far as we're aware, nobody else is doing this, so we kind of need to really collect the foundation of this work. Let's get people talking, listening, answering. Let's just see what's happening. But ultimately, I think we do mull this over. What influence does this have? Does this reassure therapists that we're doing the right thing, that we're asking the right kind of questions? Does it inspire us to keep going in sessions when it's really difficult and you don't feel like you're getting anywhere? One of the big things we've noticed with this is we know when the question is about to be given. So the value of waiting for the answer, not rushing in, trying to help the person out, actually sitting and waiting for the answer has been something that we've enjoyed exploring as well, that we need to hold back perhaps as therapists. Adam, yeah.
Yeah, I think I would say, so a lot of the research that I've done before this has focused on the process, right? So there's a couple of different kinds of research: process research, which is what happens during a session, versus outcome research, which is what is the result of the intervention. And so this is obviously a part of the process research. And I think one of the things that really understanding the process does for us is that it helps us to be really deliberate. It helps us to make decisions about how do we want to construct this session, right? Oftentimes in research, we have to use things like a treatment manual, right? Where you have to do therapy in a particular way in order to ensure that everyone gets the same kind of treatment. And I think that's a really limiting because then we don't know what impact doing something different than that might have. And I think this kind of research helps us to understand, let's play a bit and say, if we do this, what happens? And if we do that, what happens? And just listening to Rachel's previous answer about what her experience was between the problem-focused questions and the solution-focused questions, we could see instantly there was less of an emotional connection. And that led us to say, so when you were talking about the negative emotions, how come you weren't feeling those things? And that helps us. That's not a question I would ask in a therapy session, but it helps me to trust if I ask about positive emotions, the client is going to have a full brain experience. And they're going to experience change. They're going to experience difference not just with their logic and thinking, but they're also going to feel that change. So now I have a decision. Do I want to ask questions like that or not? And I don't think necessarily there's a right or a wrong to that question, but it gives me an opportunity to make a decision about what kinds of questions I want to ask. So I think that's part of it. The other part is we're in an era now of evidence-based practice, right? There's this whole push for we need to do things that are evidence-based. And typically evidence-based is founded on outcomes. But if we don't really understand why we're getting the outcomes we're getting, then some of it might be luck, or some of it might be because one clinician is doing something inherently different than another clinician or whatever. And so when we understand the process, then we can put meaning to how are we getting to evidence-based. And I think the evidence-based practice is really only useful if we can make it useful for each person that we're sitting with. And so understanding the process and having a real clear sense of that helps us to do our jobs better, I think, with each person that's sitting with us.
Mm. Yeah, Mia, do you have anything to add in terms of what this gives us?
I think I'm a practitioner, so I'm not a, I do research in this group, but I work with people in my daily life. And there, it has given me a lot more awareness of the waiting for the client to find the answer, much more, you know, I've had a lot of confirmation of what we've been talking about, that we, from a theoretical point of view, know is going on in the person in front of us. But being able to have that awareness with me in my practical work and confirming me to trust that everyone in front of me, whatever skills, whatever situation that they're in, whatever cognitive level that they're at, things are happening by one simple solution-focused question. And I think that's very valuable to pass on to practitioners as well, because most of you will experience that there are quite a lot of people not believing in solution-focused questions because it's too positive, it's whatever. But it's given, it's very useful to share with colleagues and share with other people working with it on a day-to-day level, because this can help us as practitioners to hold on and continue doing what we're doing, and trusting the process, because that can be quite difficult when you're sitting with a lot of clients and you might have people above you who are not willing to put the funding into teaching people to work with people like this. So I think it's valuable on all levels, on an academic level, but definitely also on a practical level on a face-to-face work with people out there.
Can I ask a question? Mia and Rachel, both of you mentioned waiting for the client to answer and not filling in the void, the gap.
Sorry.
So what do you see going on in the brain of the client as you're waiting, as there's that silence and pause?
Loads of activity. I think that was one of the first things that we saw, and we were just going, oh, well, you know, it's happening. What we were all talking about is that don't take away the client's opportunity to think or answer when you're sitting in silence and they say, I don't know. We had images showing they do know, and activities happening. So it does not mean, no, I don't have anything. They have a lot. And that's the key to stay quiet and wait, allow them to find the right answer for them. That was, I think that was more or less the first thing we discovered that blew us away, going, here's the evidence.
So lots going on in the brain in that silence, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Gil, you know, when people say, I don't know, in my mind, I add a little bit extra to that. I don't know yet. I don't know how to tell you. I don't know if I can trust you with the answer. I don't know how to put that into words. I don't know yet. how that information is going to be used if I give it over to you.
Mm.
You know, I think I don't know is often a holding position for people until they're ready to trust us with the answer.
I like that. It's good.
All right, so I know that we didn't get to all your questions, but we have to let you go because somebody else is going to be presenting, and I know some of you want to go see those as well. But you are more than welcome to reach out to us by email or in whatever other way you know how to get a hold of us, and we're happy to have additional conversations. But we really just wanted to say thank you for being here, and thank you for contributing. Thank you for your feedback. Please let us know what you think.
Thank you,
Joyce.
everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Don't forget, this recording will be available to view afterwards as well.
Yeah.
Adam, you can stop recording now.